This hope thing is invaluable. It's like a priceless tool. And even in the most tumultuous situations, in the most dire situations, like you could still have hope. We digging in a dumpster. And I remember her telling me now, I knew I could feed you physically and feed you spiritually at the same time. And she did that in that moment.
That was Dr. Russell Ledet, medical doctor and triple board resident at IU Health, talking about his amazing and inspiring story from security guard to mental health physician here in Indiana. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So, Dr. Ledet, it is such a pleasure to have you here and have an opportunity to get to know you better. I am super pleased to welcome you to the Freedom Forum. You simply have an amazing story, and I'm so excited to share and learn more about you and about it. However, before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming a medical doctor and a triple board resident at IU Health?
Yeah, thank y'all for having me on. This is an honor. Grew up in Louisiana, went off to the United States Navy, served in the Navy for about 10 years. Halfway through my active duty tour, I switched over to the reserves and went to college, got degrees in biology and chemistry. Then went off to NYU School of Medicine to get my Ph.D. and my master's in molecular oncology and tumor immunology. And then came back to New Orleans and went to medical school and business school at the same time. Got my M.D. and my M.B.A. And now I'm a triple board resident at Indiana University, specializing in pediatrics, adult psychiatry, and child and adolescent psychiatry. And also in between all of that, we founded this amazing nonprofit called the 15 White Coats to make sure that we can diversify healthcare because we need more doctors.
Yeah. So you ran through that like that's some normal resume for anybody. And I'm going to make us dig down in that because you just rolled it off like that's not just absolutely astounding in and of itself. So I want to start with the Navy. You spent 10 years in the Navy. I didn't appreciate that. I didn't know that you had gone to the Navy. And I have spoken to many executives who are military vets who talk about the benefit of the military, how it prepared them, particularly when they weren't necessarily mature enough or didn't have the real world experience. So I want to know, what did being in the Navy do for you and how did it prepare you for the leadership impact that you've now experienced in your current medical role?
Yeah, I always tell people that the greatest decision I've ever made in my lifetime was going to the United States Navy. I think there are a few things that were distilled from that experience. I think one of them was a sense of self. I think I came out of high school not really knowing like who I was or what I wanted to accomplish or just really how to organize my life. And it also gave me one of the cultures in the military is like to get married young. And unfortunately, sometimes, a lot of those end up in divorce. But luckily for me, I've been married to my wife. Next year makes 20 years. This girl I met in high school. And so that culture allowed for me to feel okay about getting married early, which is important for my story because, the tenet of my military experience is stability. Learning how to be financially stable and make good decisions when it came down to the economics of building a family versus building a professional career, versus learning how to be a leader in the community, but being financially stable through all of that and not just making these, rash decisions on a whim. That was the first part. But the second part is, to your point, leadership. When you get to the military, you're forced to learn how to lead. You're forced to learn how to lead men. You're forced to learn how to lead systems. You're forced to learn how to lead cultures. And you learn how to do it repeatedly and consistently. And there are metrics in place to help you to measure whether or not what you're doing is effective. And me being able to learn that at 18, 19, 20 years old, and then now to be able to mature through all these other life experiences, it's kind of like, it's like smothering some food. Like it's going to become tender over time because, you're going to have more experiences. So the military in those two ways above everything really just stabilized my life. And then after that, making decisions and being consistent were very simple because I had a lot of structure in place. I knew what time to wake up in the morning. I knew how to clearly and effectively communicate with the people who mattered the most in my life and also to people who I was vying to, get an opportunity from, whether it was when I got to college or when I needed a new job, when I got out of the military. I knew how to effectively communicate and I had a high EQ, which is tremendously important in this world that we live in now, is how to get people to feel you as opposed to just hear you. And having that on my resume didn't hurt either, because I worked in intelligence, and it's a pretty prestigious field. So it helped me a ton. And I think it's probably one of the larger contributors to where I am today.
Yeah. So we haven't talked about your childhood, but I know you had some challenges in your childhood. I want you to speak on that. But I also appreciate you were still in the Navy Reserves, but went to Southern, which is a HBCU. And I've talked many times, again, with many executives who have that HBCU background and have talked about how important that was, again, to lay another foundation. I want to know, from someone who had gotten so much structure and so much learning from the Navy and then went to what I anticipate to be the complete opposite, to go into a HBCU, what did that give you? What did that layer on top of your military experience to, again, help prepare you for leadership and executive roles that you now experience?
Again, a great decision I made was going to Southern University. I came out of high school and being very candid, I didn't think Black people could go to college, because nobody from my hood went to college. Like it wasn't a thing. Like we worked at the chemical plants, we worked at Lowe's and Home Depot, and got jobs at the stores and stuff like that. And my mom was a certified nurse's aide, and so I never really saw people who came from where I came from going to college. And my wife is really who convinced me to go to college. And I was for sure going to go to Louisiana State University. I wanted to go to the big state university. I wanted to experience Death Valley and watch the football games and basketball games. And, I wanted to pledge there. I wanted to do all the things. But then I didn't get into LSU. I ended up getting into Southern University. And candidly, at the time, I was kind of disappointed, because I was like, man, I didn't get an opportunity to go to this school. But then, I think God, he kind of was laughing at me. He was like, nah, I know exactly what you need, because I think getting all of this professional structure is awesome. But I think, especially for me, I needed some cultural structure. Like I needed some identity structure. I needed to be confident in who I am, but also be brilliant at the same time. I needed that simultaneous existence. And Southern University allowed for me to be in a room with people who understood where I was from a cultural perspective, but also gave me the freedom to be brilliant in the room, in a space where I didn't have to worry about the white gaze, which is so important, especially I was a young man trying to shape myself into who I am today. Southern University gave me that freedom from an existing perspective, to breathe, to wear my hair the way I wanted to come in with the LeBrons on, but then sit up there and talk about chemical structures. And that dichotomy at the same time happening was magical. I always tell young people, if you get an opportunity to go to an HBCU, it is the one time in your lifetime where you will be in a place where everybody around you is going to look like you, but then at the same time, they're going to be thinking about progress, educational progress, economic progress, communal progress.
Generational
progress. Because for some of us, it's our first time going to college. My mom hadn't gone to college by the time I had gone to college. And, my dad had did a little stint, but he didn't finish college. I'm definitely the first person in my family to go this far. But yeah, the generational piece too. And what it did, that I realized now in 2020 hindsight, is that it gave me this boldness to walk through the world knowing who I was. Like, I don't walk into any building questioning who I am. Oftentimes people may question who I am, but I'm not internally questioning who I am, because I was able to excel at the institutions that they call the best of the institutions, but also what I know to be the best of the institutions, which for me personally is an HBCU. So that experience was amazing, and of course there's a part of my story where I was simultaneously studying chemistry and biology, but also working as a security guard at this hospital. And that's when I really caught the bug about becoming a doctor. This idea of man, maybe I could do this for a living. And I literally was giving a talk yesterday to some new medical students, and I was telling them, I remember looking in the trauma room and it never dawned on me that nobody in the trauma room looked like me. I just thought in my head, yeah, I want to do that. I just want to do that job. I never in my head thought, oh, well, maybe I can't do it. It was just yeah, I think that's the thing I want to do. And then how I'm going to do it, I don't know. I'm going to pray about it. God will put the right people in my life, which he literally did. And then we'll figure it out from there. But I think that boldness came from being at Southern University, because like you said, it's a place.
Yeah. I I've heard that repeatedly and repeatedly, and I did not have the benefit of going to a HBCU. I went to a predominantly white institution. So I've never been able to appreciate how you translate the HBCU experience into real life and how you make that. But I have heard repeatedly over and over and over again from, diverse and Black executives, how having that foundation of excellence in a place where they allow you to be your authentic self and allow you to experience all the cultural, intricacies that
nuances.
we have. Absolutely. Nuances for sure. But still, no one questions your intellect. No one questions whether you earned the right to be there. No one questions whether you're going to change the world when you leave. And it instills a confidence that does allow you to walk in spaces where you absolutely are going to be the only one or one of few, but still have the confidence to know you should be there. The impact that you can have is so much more valuable. And so that I want to continue to highlight that in all of my guests, because I've just heard amazing stories about how it truly, truly changes your outlook on life and your career trajectory as a whole.
Yeah. The other interesting thing, too, that I always point out that sometimes gets overlooked is that, I talk to a lot of my colleagues, whether it was when I was getting my Ph.D. or even in medical school, and they're like, yeah, man, I'm not that connected to my school, anymore, and I'm like, what? I'm like, nah, bro, some of my professors are they like bonus dads to me, or bonus moms to me, bonus aunts to me. They literally will call and fuss at me if I'm not handling my business, or call and check on my kids and stuff like that. And actually, one of my professors, Dr. Oswald DeVerne, actually taught my daughter tennis.
Wow.
Long after I had graduated from Southern University. And so the legacy piece is always connected. When you go to an HBCU, it's like you joined a family. And for the rest of your life, that's a part of how you move through the world. And so that piece is priceless, because you need that, especially from a professional perspective, because we don't always get that when we walk into a lot of these other spaces. And so you always have a home at an HBCU. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So you mentioned working at a medical center during your time there, and I know, because I know portions of your story, some magical things happen. I want you to tell us what happened at the Baton Rouge Medical Center that really changed the trajectory of your life. And I wanted you to put it in the context of where you started as a child, and then that moment that really allowed you to know and believe that there was something greater out there for you.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad you brought this up. To give you some context, it was probably 1999, 1998. My mom was working as a certified nurse's aide. It's me and my sister, and then my grandmother, who she was literally illiterate. She could not read. She grew up sharecropping and was never really given an opportunity to go to school. And she raised the kids and, did all the things, but she never really got to learn. And I remember one day, we got in the car. My mom had this 1996 Chevy Lumina. It was burgundy. And we all got in the car and drove to Sam's Club on Broad Street in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and went to the back of the Sam's Club. And I'm like, what's going on? Like where we going? What we doing? And my mom parked at the corner, and she told me and my sister to get out and go run to the back of the building into a dumpster and see if we could find something there for us to eat for dinner. And I think prior to that, I thought I had an understanding of what we were struggling with. But then it really hit me, and I was like, oh, I gotta help my mom's. I don't have no other choice. Me and my sister, we found some half frozen DiGiorno pizzas, some fruit in there, some bread in there. We took it out. And I remember getting my sister out of the dumpster first. And then just before I got out, I locked eyes with my mom. And I could see that she was happy and hopeful that we had found something. And as soon as I got in the car, I was like, Mom, you happy, right? We just found something. And she was like, do your damn homework. And I was like, Mama, I got a question for you. My grandmother was like, don't question your mom. And I was like, Mama, no, I seriously got a question. She was like, what's up? I was like, how do you have hope that we going to find something in the dumpster and simultaneously have hope that I'm going to get my homework done? And she was like, hope is all I can afford right now. And so fast forwarding to me being, a security guard while I was in college, I had that same kind of hope. My mama would tell me like, you gonna be all right. You gonna be straight. Everything gonna work out for you. And she was a praying woman. She didn't really have no context for what I was doing and what I was trying to accomplish. And I remember calling her and being like, Mama, I think I want to become a doctor. She was like, well, if that's what God got for you, it's gonna work out. And so I started asking doctors, like, doctors would get out of their cars in this big parking lot with the nice, they had nice Benzes and Porsches and Rolls Royce and all this. And every one of them walking out with their white coat on. And I'm like, man, can I please shadow you? Can I shadow you? I'm in a, rent a cop suit at a hospital, and they like, yo, you a security guard, bro. Like, you don't even look like somebody who might become a doctor, And I would just keep asking them. Like, I remember asking hundreds of doctors, and they'd be like, yo, security guards don't become doctors, man. And I was like, nah, that can't be true. And I remember one night I was standing outside of the emergency department, and there was this doctor who came in who was going into the operating room to go and deal with this patient who had an infected appendix. But he didn't know how to get to the operating room, and God just placed me right where I needed to be, and I had to be the person to escort him to get to the operating room. And we were walking past the morgue, and I saw the surgery on his white coat. And I remember what I asked him. I was like, yo, you really a doctor? And he was like, yeah, I'm a surgeon. And I was like, you think I could shadow you? And he was like, yeah, you could shadow me. And I thought he was gassing me, because every other doctor I talked to was like, sometimes they give me the wrong number. Sometimes they give me email address. I email, and then it would just go, it bounced back. And I'm like, man, all these people gassing me. I was like, yo, I'm about to call you right now. And I called him, and as sure as I tell you, it was the right number. And he was like, you meet me here tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. You can shadow me. And I stayed in the hospital overnight. I got off at midnight. I went to the library. I studied. I stayed in the hospital, fell asleep in the library, woke up at 4:45, met him at the front doors. And the rest is history, because Dr. Patrick Greifenstein, who's now a chief trauma surgeon over at Louisiana State University in New Orleans, he gave me my first opportunity to shadow him and Dr. Peter Bostic, who's this world-renowned breast oncologist. And I remember what Dr. Bostic told me, and he was like, yeah, you got what it takes. He was like, you got the juice. And I didn't get into medical school on my first ride, which is why I went to go get my Ph.D. And then I got into medical school, which I still thank God for now, because had I gotten into medical school on my first ride, I would have had to pay for it. But building my resume to go and get that Ph.D. allowed for Tulane to look at me and be like, wow, this is a highly sought after candidate. Let's give him a full ride to come to medical school. And so I didn't pay for my undergrad because I went to the military. I didn't pay for my PhD because I got a bunch of fellowships from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, National Institutes of Health. And then I didn't pay for my medical school degree because I had done all this work at the number one medical school in the country at the time. And so to get my PhD. And so I thank God every day for all of these moments where my mama's like like the way she exposed me to hope was so different. Like she was like, nah, like this thing right here, this hope thing is invaluable. It's like a priceless tool. And even in the most tumultuous situations, in the most, dire situations, like you could still have hope. We digging in a dumpster and my mama like, get your homework done. And I remember her telling me now, like, I knew I could feed you, physically and feed you spiritually at the same time. And, she did that in that moment. Of course, we went behind Sam's Club a lot more times, but, still to this day, Mom's Dukes, she still telling me like, you ain't done yet. Like you got more to do. So it's good.
That's such a blessing, and it's such an uplifting story. I totally appreciate you. I appreciate, I was never in the position, thank God, to be digging in the dumpster, but I read your story about lights being off.
Yeah.
I've lived that. Absolutely. Heating the house with the oven and the stove. Like, absolutely have lived that. So I know what it means to have a praying mother and a praying grandmother who all they have is hope and the outlook that God has put on their heart that there is something better for you. I was just telling some other people when I passed the bar exam, my mother said, what God has for you is for you. Can't nobody take it away. That's so real. And that is the wisdom and hope of a praying mother and a praying grandmother, and being able to appreciate the no's when they come. To appreciate that they're setting you up for something better that is more. The fact that you got 18,000 degrees is a ridiculous in and of itself. But the fact that you are a Black man in America who didn't pay for those degrees is even
crazy.
more astounding, right? And that you have the ability to come out with all these credentials and truly begin to build generational wealth without having to dig yourself out of a financial hole. That is absolutely astounding. And it's the things that so many people don't appreciate, even when you excel and reach levels of excellence and outstanding, there is financial consequences to that, right?
Big ones.
Yes. I mean, I had to pay for law school. I wasn't as blessed as you. Things didn't align to the point where I was absolutely in a position, and it didn't work out for me. But 10, 15 years later, I so appreciate why things happen the way they happen. They set me up for bigger and better, although at the time it was absolute disappointment. And so I was just talking to some emerging leaders, and your story just reminds me that, don't be so disappointed with the no's. The no's truly are leading you to bigger and better things, and you just have to know that and have the faith of that, or some praying moms and grandmas that guide your way when you don't have the faith for yourself.
It's crazy because I first got my manager, my talent manager is a lawyer. She's a lawyer, Angel Russell. And, she became my manager back in like November of 2021. And I used to hate talking to her because I didn't understand why some people would tell me no. Like, I was like, I'm great. Like, I was like, I'm amazing. Like, these no's don't make sense. And, that opportunity is for me. And she would be like, flow. She'd be like, flow. She'd be like, God has a flow.
Yeah.
And that flow is it got your name on it. So like the no's are they good no's. Like, they not bad no's, but she would always tell me, she's like, the problem is, you've been getting yes for so long till like when God started holding back things from you, you struggle with it. But to your point, now I look back at some of those no's and I'm like, thank God for that no.
That's
like
right.
I told somebody, I was like, yo, the no for medical school when I graduated from college was a $500,000 no.
Right.
And I think back on it now and I'm like, thank God for that no.
That's right.
I needed that no so bad.
That's right. And you can only see that in retrospect, right? When he has shown you what is for you. Because in the time, you're just wondering, why didn't I get this? I worked for it. I wanted it. I did all the things. Why didn't it happen?
I'm going to tell you a funny story real quick. When I got my nose for medical school for the first time, we had this white leather couch in this condo we had bought in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I have never in my life opened my test scores. I can't open my test scores to save my life. So my wife opens all my test scores. Cause she bold enough to be like, if it's a not pass, then we just got to work through it.
Right.
If you pass, then great, we can move on.
Right.
And so when she opened it for my medical college admissions test score, she looked at me and said, she said, oh, this is a good score. And I was like, what's the score? She was like, a 16. Now, the average good score was like a 35 to a 40. And I was like, she must don't understand how the scoring scale works. She was like, no. She was like, this is a great score. And I'm sitting on the couch crying my eyes out, screaming and crying, boo-hooing. And she started laughing at me. And she was like, me and this child of yours are about to go to Joe's Crab Shack and celebrate what God is about to do. And I was like, what? Like, I'm so confused. Like, what y'all got going on? She was like, no. She was like, the score never mattered. The score never played a role. Like, this just ain't your time right now. And of course I ended up going to NYU School of Medicine, which is, I didn't realize how big of a deal it was when it happened,
right.
Because I'm just little kid coming from Southern University, doing my thing, moving up to NYU. And she reminds me all the time. She like, you remember when you was on the couch crying, talking about,
exactly.
sobbing, eating crabs and, all the things. And so the no's are not terrible. Yeah. Sometimes they're amazing. They're the greatest thing that ever happened to you as a no.
Yeah, it just takes you a while to actually appreciate that. So let's go back to Dr. Greifenstein. Is that his proper name? Dr. Greifenstein recognized in you some tenacity, humility, and hunger to achieve excellence. I love that hunger. I read that he said that he really opened the door a crack. I didn't do a lot. It was really nothing to give you time and a little bit of space. But I find so many people feel like they don't have an extra few minutes or some extra time or some extra space to afford towards someone who may have amazing potential, an opportunity of a lifetime. How did Dr. Greifenstein's willingness to entertain your curiosities, despite any of the barriers or biases he may have actually experienced, if at all, change your life? And why is it so challenging, do you think, for other people to afford their people in their, radius, the same types of opportunities, particularly if they're diverse people?
Yeah. Every time I talk with Patrick, I tell him, bruh, it had you giving me the opportunity had nothing to do with medicine. I was like, I know you think it was about medicine. Medicine was just a conduit. It ain't had nothing to do with medicine, man.
Yeah.
I said, you gave me the time of day. Like, you didn't ignore me. You didn't lie to me when you gave me your phone number. And I asked him other questions like, how do you just balance like all the studying and all this other stuff? Like, I had curiosity more about how to perform. I didn't, the medicine part I thought was just going to come with time. You get an opportunity, eventually it happens. But what he gave me to was access to the strategy, right? Like the strategy of making it. Because there's like a strategy to professionalism. There's strategy to ascension, especially career ascension. There's a strategy to it, to like how to operate in a room, how to communicate with certain people, how to be consistent, in tough situations. And so I always tell him like, man, what you gave me in that moment was access. Like, you gave me access to a doctor who could talk to me at my level. And so that was crazy. I think the challenge for people who come from diverse backgrounds is that you the first one.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you the only one.
Yeah.
Like for instance, I'm the first Black man ever to do a triple board residency at Indiana University. Ever. They've never had one before. So of course, every time, a medical student is thinking about, coming to Indiana University for a triple board residency or, and they come from a diverse background, of course they're going to lean on me. Of course they're going to ask me. And the challenge is that like as the name implies, like it's a triple board residency. I'm incredibly busy. I'm incredibly tired because I'm also raising two daughters, one who's heading into high school and one who's in the second grade. And I'm also a married man. So like I got my own stuff to handle. But, I always say to myself, like, this is my cross to bear. Like, my ancestors did 1,000,000 times more. Like I'm never able to forget like some of the experiences of some of my ancestors in that like it wasn't that long ago. It was less than 50 years ago when like we had lynchings and there would be like parties under those lynchings. And so like how much harder is it for me to answer one more email or take one more Zoom call
That's right.
or respond to one more text message or go for one more coffee break, like
tough life.
Yeah, what a tough life in a very, air-conditioned building almost all of the time, in a very safe environment, where we could get in our nice cars and turn the AC on and put our AirPods in to take the call,
Right.
So how much harder is it for me to do that? Because at the end of the day, like if I don't do it and if you don't do it, then
That's right.
Who are we expecting to do it?
That's
because
right.
I can tell you this right now. My colleagues who don't come from diverse background, people giving them the day of time.
Yeah.
Like they giving it to them. And so, and it's not to compare, it's just to say that like, that's a good model, and it's not just, for me personally, I'm into a lot of kids who come from diverse backgrounds. I'm into a lot of kids who don't come from diverse backgrounds because a lot of them are like military kids and they trying to figure out how do I create friendships after moving around the whole world, or how do I become a doctor when no one in my family has ever done it before. And so, I think I found a way, and sometimes it's micro conversations, where I give them a piece of advice and check back in with them in 3 months and say, look, I need you to do this one thing. You do that well, and then check back in with me in 3 months. Because I don't have an hour. I got 15 minutes. And I found that to be helpful. Because at the same time, while I'm ascending, I have to help somebody.
Yeah,
right?
lift as we climb.
Yeah, lift as we climb. Exactly. So
I want to get into the weeds a bit about the academics, because again, you glossed over all that like it's just normal, and I know it's not. You graduated at Southern with a double biology and chemistry major. I also graduated with a double major in biology and chemistry. You're probably the only other Black person I've ever met that has also also graduated with but you well ascended. So you also got a molecular biology master's, as I did, but then you just blew it out the water. Then you went on to get a Ph.D., and you've explained why you got a Ph.D. at that time, because you didn't get into medical school. So that was actually your answer to your first no is, okay, I won't go to medical school right now, but I'll still get this doctorate, right? Now it's time for a break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with Dr. Russell Ledet, medical doctor and triple board resident at IU Health, on this 48th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So I want to know, we talked about the transition from the Navy to HBCU. I also want to know about the transition from the HBCU, from Southern to NYU, because that seems like another just completely disparate cultural experience. And then why again, you told us about getting the PhD, but why so many degrees? What was the impetus to keep you academically inclined and just taking different steps to get to medical school, which clearly was the ultimate goal early on?
I'll tell you about an experience I had in Morocco. We deployed in 2007. I deployed in 2007 with the United States Navy aboard the USS John L. Hall, and we went to Casablanca, Morocco. Just outside of Casablanca, Morocco, which is in northwestern Africa, there is the third largest mosque in the world. And just not too far north of that mosque is an orphanage. And it was so many kids at this orphanage. Oh my God. It was hundreds of kids at this orphanage. And, I remember walking away from that experience being like, these kids will likely never get an opportunity to learn. They'll never get an opportunity to read. They'll never get an opportunity to open a book. And if they do, it'll be so much later in their life. They're going to have so much catching up to do. And that night, I remember talking to God about chances and just like, what was I taking for granted? And, you know, my wife will tell you that her thing is, the reason why I was attracted to you is because of how smart you were. Like, you never brought books to class, but you knew everything. But she didn't know, like, I was a bookworm. I stayed in the library. I loved to read. And so when I came back to the United States, and I was getting ready to re-up, and I was trying to figure out, am I going to re-enlist as an enlisted man, or am I going to go to the reserves? And my wife had convinced me, look, you should go to college because these deployments are becoming more dangerous.
Right.
You know, we need you around.
Right.
We trying to raise a kid and these kinds of things. You know, I said when I got to college, I was like, I'm never going to take an opportunity to learn ever for granted, ever. Because I've seen there are people who never get an opportunity. And in America, you have like so much access to education that it's like overwhelming sometimes. Like, you know, we got free libraries everywhere you look, you know, and there's computers everywhere. There's like so much that we have access to from an education perspective that I just made a determination in my life that like I was going to enjoy this privilege that I had to like just learn. No one was going to stop me from learning, which, you know, in hindsight, also my ancestors never had the opportunity.
Absolutely.
You know, so I was like, who am I to take that for granted? So that really is what drove me. And actually, if I'm honest, I didn't realize how far I had run until I picked my head up. And I mean, I know you've experienced this before where you like, hold up, like, I don't need to hustle no more. Like, I didn't outran the crowd. Like, I literally have outrun the crowd. I was telling this to my brother yesterday on the phone. He was like, how does it feel to be on a call with like a $3.6 trillion company? And, you know, I was like, bro, sometimes I pick my head up and I'm like, oh, wow. I could probably stop running now. And so for me, it's just like never taking for granted this thing that like, my ancestors my grandmother couldn't read, so she never got an opportunity. I always say my grandmother would never believe I am who I am, or I've obtained the education I've been able to obtain. And so I use it for good. You know, I don't use it to be braggadocious, or I don't use it as a way to exclude myself. I use it as a way to just make a way for other people, because I think, helping people to come to the realization that like, yo, you have access in abundance. Like you have access to education and information in a way that like you cannot wrap your head around. You could go to a library every day except for holidays and just literally study and nobody will bother you. You have access to internet. You can access people on, on social media now. The opportunity is endless at this point. That's what happened for me. And now it's just a matter of making sure that my children understand it, the kids I'm associated with, mainly because I'm training as a pediatrician. And so children and their mental health is a huge focus for me. But yeah, I think what happened is one day I picked my head up and was like, oh, bro, you might want to stop now. Like, I think you've collected enough coins. You might want to chill out. You don't need no more education. And people always joke, like, you should go to law school. I'm like, my wife would kill me if I said I was going to law school.
Yes, I'm sure she would. You mentioned, we truly are our ancestors' wildest dreams. I remember my grandfather didn't live long enough to see me graduate from law school, but he did know that I had gone to law school. And I came from the thought process, particularly from my grandfather, every family, but particularly a Black family, needs a doctor and a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And because I had that biology and chemistry background, they thought I was going to be the doctor. But I think at the Reels and Roots, which we'll talk about a little bit, you mentioned, because I remember laughing because that was my experience, you saying, I saw the blood, what I described as blood and guts, and realized I can't do that. Like, that's not in my path. So when I became a lawyer, it really was one of the highlights for him, because we had really kind of gotten the first person to ever go to college and then go beyond
to become a lawyer now.
Absolutely. So, and knowing those are the roots you come from, I feel, and you clearly do too, because I know how much you're involved with the community, with kids, with all the things, that responsibility to lift people up, to help guide their path, to help give them insights into what we've learned that nobody could tell us because nobody we knew the path. Now we have a little more insight because we've been given access so that we can make it not so challenging, or at least put up a guidepost as this at least worked for me. Try this, right? You may have to navigate your own path, but we have a little more knowledge right now as to what success looks like. And to your point, being the only one, being the first, being one of few, there's always the responsibility for you to help support the next generation and help personify excellence in your field, right? If you can see us, you can be us. Letting people know there are people who look like me who have been successful here. That in and of itself will make half the folks believers just there, not even knowing all the background, all the challenges, all the obstacles, all the issues. So I appreciate, I commend you, because I feel that responsibility myself. It is the legacy that we will leave beyond our technical impact. It will be the people that we invested in, the calls, the Zoom calls. I just left a student today, was on a panel yesterday. It's just part of what I do, because I want that to be my legacy. I want people to be able to tell my son, who thinks I don't know anything at all, that your mom helped me. Your mom talked to me. Your mom took my call. She mentored me. She did whatever. So I fully appreciate that. So you talked about so many of the things that you're passionate about, and I want to talk about some of those. In particular, after all these gazillion years, I got to estimate about 15, it may have been more, of getting all these different advanced degrees in science and medicine. And then you came to Indiana. You told me you've now been in Indiana for 4 years. So of all these disparate cultural experiences, you've been from the Navy to Baton Rouge for school to, NYU for another school. And then you come to Indiana. Wow. Now I know that's interesting. But before you ever came to Indiana, and I certainly want to get your thoughts on that a little later, I want you to tell me about these 15 white coats that you mentioned. It's something that you started before coming here. You've continued it here, and I want you to tell me what that is, why you're passionate about it, and what's the importance of it.
Yeah, the 15 white coats came after this photo of 15 African-American medical students from Tulane University. We had taken a trip to the Whitney Plantation, which is now like this museum that really talks about the history of the systemic issue, that we had in our country called slavery and what came from it. And we took this photo, all 15 of us in our white coats and all black. And, we had our fists raised and we standing there really as a way for us to pay homage to the experience of our ancestors and the brutal experience of our ancestors, and really to let them know, like, hey, we didn't waste this truly harmful experience that you all had and tumultuous experience that you all had. We came back to remember you all, but also we came back to let you know we winning.
Yes.
And those photos went viral. They ended up on BBC, People Magazine, Good Morning America, everywhere. And I remember us getting this invite from Kelly Clarkson to go on her show. And myself and Dr. Sidney Labat, Dr. Rachel Turner, and a couple of the rest of us got together and were like, yo, we not doing that. Like we gonna go do the show, but what we're not gonna do is do this for clout. Like, we can't do this for clout. We got to figure out a way how to use this as a way to really make a difference and really diversify medicine, because like, we know how hard it is to get here, but we also know it ain't that many of us here.
Right.
Like, so as a function of that, we started this nonprofit. You can learn more about the nonprofit at the15whitecoats.org. But, after that viral moment, we decided to do three things. One was cultural imagery. We wanted to take those photos, turn them into posters, and put them on in classrooms all over the country. And now we have conversations about where does the next doctor come from? What hood do they come from? Or, what do they look like? Or what do they sound like? Can they wear a hijab? Those kinds of things. The second part was economic transfer. So we wanted to build scholarships because the economic cost of becoming a doctor is high. Like, it can cost some upwards $10,000, $15,000 to just try one time to become a doctor and apply to medical school. And so we've raised a lot of money to do that and are still raising money to do that. And then the third part was cultural literacy. So if you think about it, whether you're becoming a doctor or a lawyer, a PA, MP, whatever, you got to have really good literacy skills. You got to be able to read. You got to be able to interpret. You got to be able to comprehend. And, one of my issues was these kids are being taught to read these books that don't match their lived experience.
Yeah.
So they don't really have an interest in reading. It's like, you're going to go tell me a kid from the Far East got to read Gone with the Wind. It's like, what's the point? Like, it doesn't match their lived experience. And so they're going to have very little interest in it because they can't relate to it. And so we wanted to make sure that kids could read books that reflected their lived experience, which I have to shout out Cummins, a company that does a lot of amazing work here in Indianapolis and really in Indiana and all over our country, who were the first ones to genuinely invest in the Resilient Readers book box. So we came up with this idea, and one of our amazing community partners, Natalie Pipkin, who runs the Black Rose Schoolers bookstore here in Indianapolis, she curated these book boxes for us for K through 3, 4 through 6, and then high school, with titles of books that reflected the lived experience of the kids we wanted to target, and then helped us to put those in classrooms and in daycares all over Indiana. And now we're really going across the country with it, where kids get access to books that reflect their lived experience. And so, this cultural imagery, economic transfer, and cultural literacy is kind of our way of making sure that if we are going to build the next generation of doctors who come from diverse backgrounds, these are things that we have to do to give them the tools they need to succeed. And, that's our way of making sure that we don't just become doctors and buy, big boats and big houses and big cars and just forget about where we came from.
Yeah, amen to that. So I want to ask about this, the lived experiences and being able to incorporate your lived experience into, what your career looks like, being able to integrate that, particularly for the younger generation. I want to know about, again, you've come to Indiana recently. You've had all these disparate experiences in so many diverse locations. And then you come to Indiana where, in the last 4 years, we've had a whole lot of political and legislative challenges around healthcare. You're in healthcare.
Yep.
We've had, federal challenges around the books you can read. And you're talking about curating all these diverse books for these little, diverse kids to make sure that they're reading things that relate to their lived experience. So I want to know, What has been your experience as a healthcare leader in Indiana? Not just generally, not all the things you've experienced in the past, but specifically here. And how has that compared to other places you've been? And has there been, in particular, specific obstacles or barriers that you've experienced here that you think are unique to here, or just generally reflect the lack of diversity in healthcare leadership around the country?
I have to preface what I'm about to say by saying that, like, notoriety helps a ton.
You mean you get treated a little differently when you got...
it's not that you get treated a little bit differently. You just got access to a different set of friends.
Yeah, okay.
You know, you got access to a different set of friends.
Yeah,
and
okay.
So, you know, when you come up with an idea and the people, you know, within your purview and in your proximity are like, nah, we don't like that idea. You like, cool, I'm gonna go find my other friends who I know like the idea. They gonna help me fund it, and then we gonna do it anyway.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So either way it go, either, you know, in either case, you know, generally when I come up with an idea, I've already figured out, like, you know, we gonna do this no matter what. I'm just giving you an opportunity to partner with me, but just
to get in on the ground floor.
Yeah, you can get in on the ground floor, but just in case you like, I can't jive with this because, you know, it doesn't fit the culture, then cool, bro. I'm gonna go reach out to some people who I know just they got it. So we straight. So coming here, initially, actually, the most pleasant experience I have had in healthcare, I was on the south side of Indianapolis when my wife and I first got here. My kids hadn't even come yet, and we had gone to Penn Station subs to go get a sandwich. And this was our first time ever going. We left the Target. We went to the Penn Station, and I had just posted this video to TikTok just saying, you know, how excited I was to be a triple board resident at Indiana University and all of these things. And this lady walks in, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're Dr. Ledet." And I'm like, "What's up?" Like, "Hey, how you doing? It's good to see you. You know, it's good to meet you." And she was like, "We're so happy to have you here. Like, it's amazing to have you here. You know, you so jovial and you've had all these experiences and all of these things." And I was like, "Cool." And so right before I left, she got me and my family I think a $50 Penn Station gift card and bought us some cookies and I've had that experience multiple times since I've been here. And so from a public perspective, it's been, you know, it's been quite nice. You know, it's been cool, you know, to kind of in some ways be a public figure.
Yeah.
But in an area that seems, you know, very it's interesting to be a notoriable figure in healthcare. Because generally that's just not a thing. You only see the doctors only in the hospital, right? But I'm very community oriented, so it's a thing. From a collaborative perspective, sometimes it's been challenging, you know, and I think part of it is because I came from New Orleans where, you don't have to like curtail who you are, to quote unquote, like what they say oftentimes, sometimes it's like play nice in the sandbox. Like, you know, in New Orleans, like people know what the culture is. So they like, cool, like you bringing something here that's, you know, that's extremely different and we get it, like we understand it. Versus here, you know, there have been times where, you know, I've met some people and I'm like, for sure you're going to be down with this because like, I know why we kick it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I need you to be on board with this. And they like, nah, man, like this is... It's too out there, or it's too, you know, too culturally associated.
Too ethnic.
It's too ethnic or whatever you want to call it. And I'll be like, all right, cool. Like, I'm gonna go get some of the homies from the Far East or get some folks from Post Road and Harville and we gonna make it do what it do.
Right.
Or, you know, I'm gonna go, you know, like I did for Reels and Roots, go to the Muslim community. I already know what time it is, you know, with them, they ain't even playing these games. And we gonna do something amazing. And that's exactly what we did with Reels and Roots, and you know, and now it's like snowballing into something way bigger. But I think from a collaborative perspective, somebody brought this to my realization recently, is that what happened with a lot of the experiences I've had in the South is a function of history. You know, in the South, people from diverse communities have had to force their way into freedom. You know, and so like once they got it, they was like, ain't no question, like we about to turn up at all times. Versus, you know, sometimes in the Midwest, like I would assume that like from a historical perspective, there have been many times where like playing nice has been the way you survive, like, the way you get by, And so when you're an outsider coming in, you like, oh, I don't know about that, because we don't do that in New Orleans. Like when we just turn up no matter what. And in Chicago, they don't either. They do their own thing. LA, DC, which are all places I've been. And so I've had some people who have had to turn a corner and be like, oh, okay, this is a different way to go about doing things. But also in those ways, sometimes it's hard to garner the financial support because they only think about it from,
yes,
the people locally have to be the people to fund it. And I'm like, nah, they got some homies in New York who will send us a check tomorrow to make it happen. And so teaching people that there's a different way to go about making things happen that are healthy, safe, and really rich and are great experiences. And you could bring people from Carmel and Fishers and all these different places. Reels and Roots, one of the things that Qasim Basir, who's the director who was there, really pointed out, he was like, bro, they had people in here who said they live in Carmel and Fishers, and they had people who said they live in Harville, like all in the same room, enjoying themselves and asking questions together and learning together, which for me sometimes can be a complex for some people here. They like, no, if you live there, you ain't no way you could come kick it with people here. And then the people there are thinking the same way. And I'm like, nah, that ain't true.
Right.
You just got to find the right dynamic. So I've had to be creative sometimes. And then sometimes I've just been like, I'm just kicking the door down.
Yeah, I'm making it happen.
Yeah, I'm going to make it happen no matter what. Trust me, I'm going to figure it out.
Absolutely. And Reels and Roots absolutely was one of those. You've implied what it was, but tell us about Reels and Roots. Tell us why it was important. What were you trying to achieve with that? I had the opportunity to come. I thought it was phenomenal. I appreciate you thinking outside the box and bringing something new. I hadn't been to anything like that before. But tell me what you were trying to achieve and if you thought you achieved it.
First of all, I got to give you a shout out, Angela. The question you asked me had me on my toes about accessibility to mental health. And so I appreciate you bringing that question forward at Reels and Roots. But the idea behind Reels and Roots is in LA, in Chicago, Paris, London, there are always these movie premieres, right? And they bring out the big stars and there's the director there and oftentimes the writer and the actors. And you get to hear from the visionaries behind a film. And oftentimes, I mean, everyone knows this, films provoke conversations. Film provokes memories from experiences, right? But you don't get those experiences when you live in smaller markets. Like when you live in places that aren't like the biggest poppin' city, like in Indianapolis, which is an amazing city, but directors, the Steven Spielbergs of the world, the Denzel Washingtons of the world are not. This is not where they're going to do a film premiere. I wanted to change the conversation. Like I was like, nah, like I think Indianapolis is worthy of a film showing, maybe not a premiere, but for sure a film showing. And the film showing is awesome, but it's even better when you can have a conversation with the person who was thinking up the film, because oftentimes the conversations that those films provoke are the conversations that our communities need.
Right.
We could talk about this most recent one, which was To Live and Die and Live, where we're talking about grief and addiction and recovery. And faith as a function of that film. But then like these next three that we have, which is about, reentry from the justice system. Then we're going to have one on youth violence, which is a huge topic here in our city where we starting to consider things like curfews and things of that nature to try to curb some of the violence in our city. And then this last one about maternal health, which is also a huge issue here in our state, right? Like these films will generate conversations, and bringing the directors and other specialists from Indiana University and Community and Peyton Manning Hospital to have these conversations not only brings local voices that are already trusted, but also the visionaries behind the film to have deepened conversations that's going to push forward Indianapolis. Like that's the whole goal, is to make all of us think that like, yo, we can actually collaborate in a way that isn't about us versus you, and it's about a we thing, which is what a lot of big cities already do. Like when you think about Chicago, they have learned how to come together. LA, same thing. Paris, same thing. London, same thing. And so if Indianapolis's idea of what the future will look like is to collaborate and congeal and come together to move forward, then you got to be able to sit in a room and have conversations that talk about progress in a way that feels safe. And so what Reels and Roots is trying to do is to foster that through film, which is something that we all love. Everybody loves to watch a good movie. But then to have the visionary in the room is kind of the icing on the cake, and to have that proximity to him is special. So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, it was really phenomenal. I was so thankful that you posted about it, because that's where I saw it and was like, I'm about to go interview this man. This would be a great opportunity for us to meet. And then I had the opportunity while I was there. You shouted out Phi Beta Sigma, and of course I'm a Zeta, so that was another point of connection that I don't know that I would have pulled out unless I attended that. So that's really well. One thing I appreciated with Reels and Roots, it is another mechanism, you are trying to be innovative in how you bring conversations about mental health, how you bring awareness about mental health, particularly to the communities who so often do not address mental health, which is our communities, men in particular. You did Reels and Roots as a shout out and as a event to address Men's Mental Health Month for June. All of that is, so needed. But I also want to ask you about how you are continuing to be innovative in using technology, whether that's AI or machine learning or whatever the case may be, generative AI, to also continue to elevate awareness around mental health, around psychiatry, around the need for that, particularly in underserved or underrepresented communities. Tell us about that.
Yeah. This idea of me becoming a triple boarder started when I was in medical school. When I was a first-year medical student, I met this amazing guy. His name was Dr. Ledet. He was a triple board program director for Tulane University, and he was just such a dynamic individual. Like, he was awesome to sit down and talk with. And, in your profession, I'm sure you've just met somebody, you're like, yo, I want to be like them. Like, they off the chain. And they just do things differently, but it's amazing. And so Ledet was that person for me, and he let me come to his clinic one day, and I'll never forget it because it's really shaped how I do things in terms of like technology and stuff now. And I went to his clinic one day, and we met this young Black boy who was being managed for a mental health disorder. And right before this young Black boy left, he said to me something that I'll never forget. He was like, yo, will you be my doctor? And I was just a first-year medical student. He had just met me for the very first time. And I remember telling Mio right before I left, and I was a first-year medical student, still had 4 years to go. I was like, yo, I'm going to be a triple boarder. I was like, and I'm specifically going to be a child psychiatrist. And he was like, what? I was like, yeah, because that kid probably can never imagine that experience of, having someone in front of him who he knew like, they got it. They understood what was going on, and they were thinking about them. And so fast forward to today, when I think about how I am thinking about ways to innovate this mental health space and utilizing AI, one of the interesting things that I've done is had a lot of conversations, focus groups with parents around this tumultuous experience of being the parent of a teenager. So if you're a listener and you've ever had a teenager, then you know that is a very, very, very challenging period of your life. And you question everything because you're like, I got to know something, but my kids are telling me I don't know anything. But I really want to connect with this child because I'm so invested in them. And so oftentimes the issue there is that, the teenager is speaking one language, which is this language of trying to figure out where do they fit into the world. And they're starting to separate from the way we've done things for so long. But the parent, one, doesn't recognize that, or maybe they do and they just can't acknowledge it just yet. But the other part is that, like, they haven't learned the language that those kids speak now. And that's a whole new language, right? And so my personal opinion is that we can utilize AI as a means of moving that conversation closer together, especially during the most critical period of those kids' lives, because the decisions that they make during that period are so important for what the future for them will look like, especially during their 20s when it's really an exponential phase for many of them, and then kind of this solidification in their 30s. These decisions they make during their teenage years really comes to shape out what the rest of their future will look like. But they need to hear these guiding voices from their parents that oftentimes they tune out, partly because of tone, but also because of positioning. Like, is this the right time? Is it asked the correct way? And so there are ways in which we can have these conversations in a way that helps the teenager to feel like it's not an incriminating conversation. It's a supportive and safe conversation, and all with the access of your phone, like on an app. And so my team and I, who actually there's a board certified psychiatrist on there, Dr. Danielle Patterson, and the lead juvenile judge for Franklin County, Judge Lachelle Stroud is on there. And then we actually have 2 teenagers on our team. My daughter, who's a 14-year-old, headed to Park Tudor. And then we have a 15-year-old who's in the 10th grade on there. And then we have a medical student who's interested in going to psychiatry, who's at University of California, San Diego. And the 6 of us have come together and put our heads together to build this this app called Mend, with the idea of fostering this closer conversation between parents and their children in a way that almost makes you feel like the app knows you. And shapes the way you ask questions to your child, and also shapes the way a child can ask you a question. Because oftentimes parents are like, I need to tell my kid something. But believe it or not, your kid also needs to tell you something. And oftentimes they don't feel like they can, which we've gotten this data from kids, because the parents are just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, and the kids don't get to actually say it in a way that feels safe for them. And so we're working on it. We feel like we're pretty close to having a beta version. We grinding along. And, I'm super excited to see that come to fruition. And also there's some animation work that my daughter and I have been doing since COVID. And also some gaming stuff that I've recently started working on around AI and mental health as well. That's probably in the earlier stages, but I think it's probably about a year away from being on the market. So I think I'm just being very intentional about answering the question, what did I need when I was that age? What did I need when I was a child? And how did I need the person who was in a position to do something about it to think?
Yeah.
To really create answers that was accessible for me, even for, this app that I was just telling you about, and even the gaming is not just for kids who are just in the community. I'm actually intentionally creating this for access to kids who are on inpatient psychiatry units and also incarcerated children. Because I think we have forgotten that there are children who are behind bars. And sure, I'm pretty sure we're fully aware that they've made some mistakes, but it doesn't mean that they can't learn. It doesn't mean that we can't support them and grow them into amazing human beings. And part of what we call like rehabilitation is literally putting something in place that's viable and creates progress for them, right? And so that's kind of where my head is right now.
Yeah.
Just making sure it's inclusive and really doesn't forget about them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know today you said you were coming directly from the prison. So I know, again, that is something that you are extremely passionate about.
Yep.
Your time is spread very thin, but has ridiculous impact. So as we begin to wrap up, I want to ask you two parting questions. One, I think it's pretty evident what makes you so successful, but I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
What are the qualities or characteristics or skills that you believe have empowered your career success in the medical field to date? And then finally, as you spent 4 years in Indiana, and I pray that, Indiana has the ability to keep you for as long as possible, what do you think that the people in charge, or the policies, the procedures that could be implemented to ensure that there genuinely and truly is more diverse representation at all levels of Indiana healthcare institutions in 10, 15 years as compared to now in 2025?
Yeah. To answer your first question of what do I think makes me successful, I think it's a lot of prayer for me personally. I think my wife is probably the biggest reason why I'm successful, because she believes in me when I don't believe in myself, but she also humbles me when I think too much of myself. You need that healthy balance.
Right.
And I think the third part of it is that I'm not afraid. Part of that dumpster moment and that hope piece is that, like, it ain't gonna go away anytime soon. As a matter of fact, the only thing that's gonna happen is that it's just gonna get stronger. Like, it's just gonna get stronger. I'm gonna get hungrier. I'm gonna realize I can make more of an impact. I'm gonna be more connected and have a larger network over time. That's a no-brainer. But I'm just not scared. And part of the reason why I'm not scared is because I'm not afraid to fail. Like, I don't have no issues whatsoever with failing. I know I'm going to learn from it. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try like hell. So that allows for me to try a lot of times. And the more tries you put in, eventually something's going to stick, right? So there's that part. I think as far as the question about, creating a more diverse healthcare workforce, the people who have to make decisions about who they hire, about who they put in positions for admissions at medical schools, and how they go about selecting the next group of medical students, I think there's an internal question they have to ask themselves. There's something that I often say when I do these keynote talks everywhere is, you can't be David Duke at home and then be Martin Luther King at work. It does not work that way. You can't. This is a real, when you work in healthcare, you work in a humanity space. And you work with humans who come from all different backgrounds. And you have to ask yourself this internal question: why am I afraid of different? Why am I afraid of different? Why am I afraid if their hair looks a little bit different than mine? Why am I afraid if they sound a little bit different than me? Why am I afraid if they wear some shoes that look a little bit different than mine? And why does this afraidness influence how I do my job? Because when we talk about bias, that's really what we're saying, is that you have these ingrained thoughts about people that then impact the way you make decisions, right? And I think that hard work of asking that question and being bold enough to answer it in a way that causes change is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of professional maturity. It's a sign of personal maturity. And I think it's a sign of community maturity, which is something that oftentimes people, they struggle with. And sometimes it's psychological, and sometimes it's just a matter of preservation, self-preservation. Oftentimes you see people making decisions against their own interests as a sense of self-preservation, right? You got to remain a part of the club, and no matter what, you just got to do whatever it takes to remain a part of the club, and eventually things will work out in your favor and you'll get a crumb off the table. But I have never seen America move forward in a progressive way that way. We've always been the country to be innovative. We've always been the country to work, to try our best to work together. There are some people who would argue differently, and we have some data to suggest that that's probably true from a historical standpoint. But those of us who have thought of progress as a means of defining America have thought of it as a way of us working together and not away from each other. And so I think the challenge for, Indiana leadership is going to be not how you work across the aisle, but how you all work together. Because in my mind, thinking of it across the aisle is like, I'm inconveniently just going over there to say I did something, versus let's meet in the middle somewhere. Let's figure out what a middle road will look like, where progress and personal ambition can be met somewhere. So it's a challenge, and I get it. I'm going to be in Indiana for a good little while. So I think at some point I'll impact some change around here in a meaningful way. But I think right now the challenge is going to be for us to do the opposite of just fitting in to say we fitting in and self-preservation stuff. So,
well, I am so pleased you stopped by. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much. I know our listeners have learned so much. I'm so thankful for you are here. I hope you stay in Indiana as long as we can keep you.
I ain't going
you
nowhere.
And Caitlin Clark. I need to keep both y'all here. If we can do that, we're doing something. Thank you so much, Dr. Ledet, for being on the Freedom Forum.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you again to Dr. Russell Ledet, and thanks to you for joining us on this 48th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.